I never thought I'd say this, but at 70, I find peace in avoiding people. It's not something I imagined myself admitting a few decades ago. In my 30s and 40s, I was always surrounded by people, family, friends, neighbors, coworkers. I believed connection was everything, and in many ways, it was. I gave my time freely, attended every event, remembered every birthday, and made it my mission to be someone others could depend on. But something has changed, quietly but deeply. These days, I've started pulling away, not out of bitterness, not because I dislike people, but because I've finally learned how precious my time and peace really are. At first, I worried that this change in me was a sign of decline. Was I becoming isolated? Was something wrong? But after countless conversations with friends my age and years of quiet reflection, I realized this shift is far more common than we think, and far healthier than we've been taught to believe. In fact, mental health experts are starting to talk about something called social fatigue, especially in older adults. After decades of emotional labor, listening, giving, caring, fixing, we begin to feel worn not from physical exhaustion, but from constantly tending to everyone else's needs before our own. And biologically, this makes sense. As we age, our nervous systems crave lower stimulation, less drama, more clarity. We begin to seek calm, not chaos. Peace, not performance. Stillness, not noise. Avoiding people isn't about rejection, it's about preservation. And if you found yourself doing the same, turning down invitations that used to excite you, needing more silence than socializing, choosing depth over breadth in relationships, I want you to know, you're not alone. Honestly, I'd love to hear your experience. Has this shift happened to you too? If so, please take a moment and share it in the comments. You'd be surprised how many of us are walking this quiet path together. And while you're here, if this resonates with you, please hit the like button. It helps more people find this message. Subscribe if you haven't already, so we can keep walking this journey of honesty, aging, and self-respect together. Now, let me tell you how it all began. For most of my life, I believed that being present for others was the highest form of love, and in some ways, it still is. But I never asked myself whether I was being present for myself, whether I was giving my time and energy to people who truly valued it, or to those who simply expected it. I've come to learn that a full calendar doesn't equal a full heart, that sometimes the loneliest place in the world is a crowded room where no one really sees you. And so, I began to retreat, not dramatically, not out of spite, but intentionally. I chose solitude not as an escape, but as a return to my own thoughts, my own pace, my own sense of meaning. Now, when I sip coffee in the morning and feel the sun on my skin, I don't feel like I'm missing out. I feel like I'm arriving to a life that finally feels like mine. So yes, at 70, I avoid people, but only the ones who drain me, only the ones who expect me to perform rather than be, and only the ones who mistake constant presence for love rather than presence with intention. Because what I've learned is this: protecting your peace isn't selfish. It's sacred. 1. Time feels more precious than ever. I never used to think much about time. In my younger years, it felt endless, like some vast river I could wade into whenever I pleased. I took my time for granted, filling it with tasks, people, obligations, and noise. There was always another day, always next week, always a later. But now, at 70, I see time for what it really is: finite, fleeting, and fiercely precious. That realization didn't hit me all at once. It came quietly, during slow mornings when the sunlight slipped through the curtains a little differently, when I found myself lingering over a cup of coffee, not because I was tired, but because the moment felt too perfect to rush. It came in quiet evenings, when memories began to play like old films in my head. Faces I hadn't seen in years, places I once walked, hands I once held. Time now feels less like a measurement and more like a mirror, reflecting back not just how long I've lived, but how deeply I've felt. When we're young, we live as though time is renewable. We waste it on conversations that don't matter, on people who don't value us, on distractions that rob us of meaning. And we assume, always, that there's more coming. But eventually, we all reach a point when we begin to ask ourselves, what am I doing with the time I have left? That question changes everything. It changes what you say yes to. It changes how you wake up. It changes who you allow into your space. As someone who has spent years working with seniors, listening to their regrets, their wisdom, their breakthroughs, I can tell you, this shift is universal. The closer we get to life's later chapters, the more urgently we feel the need to be intentional. We no longer want to be busy, we want to be present. We don't want to kill time, we want to nourish it. These days, I find deep joy in the quiet rituals of everyday life. A morning walk where the air feels soft and honest. Sitting by the window and watching the wind move through the trees. Writing down memories before they fade. These aren't fillers between bigger events. They are the main events. They remind me that time, when savored, becomes its own kind of wealth. It took me years to realize that time spent doesn't always equal time well spent. I've been in rooms full of people and felt utterly alone. I've gone to parties, meetings, reunions, only to leave feeling empty. What I cherish now are the meaningful moments. A phone call with a friend who truly listens, a quiet dinner with someone who sees me, a laugh shared with no agenda. Of course, this change sometimes confuses people. They ask why I don't go out more, why I don't fill my calendar like I used to. But the truth is, I no longer measure the quality of my life by how packed my days are. I measure it by how present I feel. So yes, time feels more precious than ever, but it also feels richer. And I believe that's the real gift of aging. Not just realizing how much time you've used, but learning how to use the time you still have, beautifully, deliberately, and with grace. Because the clock may be ticking, but that doesn't mean we're running out. It simply means we now understand the value of every tick. 2. Relationships change, and so do we. As time becomes more precious, so do the people we choose to spend it with. The truth is, relationships evolve, just like we do. Some grow deeper, more sacred over time. Others quietly fade, like a song that once meant everything, but no longer plays the same tune. In my earlier years, relationships were the center of my world. I wanted to be there for everyone. To be the good friend, the loyal family member, the dependable colleague. I kept my calendar full, my phone buzzing, my doors open. I didn't realize it then, but I was trying to prove something, that I mattered, that I belonged, that I was needed. But as I entered my 60s, and especially now in my 70s, something shifted. The people who once filled my days began to drift. Some moved away. Others grew in different directions. A few simply stopped calling. And I've learned to stop taking it personally. Life changes. People grow. So do we. There's a kind of pruning that happens with age, not just with our schedules or our habits, but with our relationships. We begin to see more clearly who nourishes us and who quietly depletes us. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes, the fading is gentle, like setting down a book you once loved, realizing the chapter you shared has ended. Working with older adults over the years, I've seen this pattern over and over again. Many of us fear losing people in our later years. But what we don't often talk about is the relief that comes when we stop forcing connections that no longer feel mutual. There's freedom in letting go of relationships built on obligation rather than understanding. It doesn't mean we stop loving people. It means we love differently. We love wiser. We set boundaries not out of coldness, but out of care, for ourselves and for others. We stop chasing people who don't value us. We learn that not every relationship is meant to last a lifetime. Some were meant for a season, and that's okay. I used to believe being there for everyone made me a good person. Now, I believe that being honest about my energy and my emotional limits makes me a healthy person. The truth is, real connection doesn't demand our constant presence. It only asks for sincerity when we do show up. Some relationships I've lost still sting when I think of them. A friend who felt like family. A cousin whose laughter once lit up every gathering. But I've come to cherish them for what they were, not what they could have been. Their role in my story mattered. And that chapter remains special, even if it's closed. There's also a quiet joy in the relationships that endure. These are the friends who don't keep score, who don't need explanations. The ones you can call after months of silence and pick up right where you left off. These are the people who remind you that real connection doesn't fade, it deepens. And then, there are the new connections. Yes, even now. I've met people in recent years who feel like soul friends, gentle, present, real. It turns out, meaningful relationships don't expire with age. Sometimes, they arrive when we least expect them, once we've cleared space for the right ones. So yes, relationships change, and so do we. What we need, What we offer, what we expect, it all evolves. And that's not something to grieve. It's something to embrace. Because the people who remain in your life at this age, they're not there by accident. They're there by choice. Yours and theirs. And that, to me, is the most beautiful kind of bond there is. 3. Trust becomes more complicated. As relationships shift with time, something else changes quietly along the way: trust. In our younger years, trust is often given freely, almost naively. We assume the best in people. We believe that kindness will be returned, that loyalty is mutual, and that intentions are as pure as our own. And sometimes they are. But more often than we'd like to admit, they're not. By the time you reach your 70s, trust no longer comes so easily. And honestly, that's not always a bad thing. It's not about becoming bitter or closed off. It's about becoming wise. In my own life, and in the lives of countless older adults I've worked with, there comes a point where you realize some of the deepest wounds came from the people you trusted most. A friend who took more than they gave. A family member who vanished when you needed them. A partner who broke promises with a quiet, practiced ease. Those experiences don't make you cold, but they do make you cautious. I've learned to approach new relationships with what I call gentle skepticism. Not suspicion, but awareness. Not walls, but gates. Gates that open when it feels safe, and close when something feels off. And the older I get, the more I trust that feeling in my gut. It's rarely wrong. But trust isn't just about others. It's also about ourselves. Learning to trust your own instincts again, especially after they've been shaken, is one of the hardest and most powerful things you can do as you age. I had to learn how to walk away from situations that drained me, even if they looked fine on the outside. I had to forgive myself for not seeing the red flags sooner. And I had to remind myself that setting boundaries isn't unkind, it's essential. There's also another layer that doesn't get talked about enough: when trust breaks down within your own family. Many older adults carry silent grief over siblings who stopped calling, children who grew distant, or caretakers who made them feel invisible. These losses cut deeper than we're often willing to admit, because they're not just about betrayal, they're about disappointment. About realizing that the people who were supposed to understand didn't. So how do you move forward when trust feels fractured? For me, it came down to simplifying. I stopped trying to fix every broken bond. I stopped justifying hurtful behavior just because someone was family. And I started focusing on the people who showed up consistently, kindly, quietly, and without expectation. What's surprising is that trust, when rebuilt slowly, can be even stronger than before. I've met people later in life who have restored my faith, not by doing grand things, but by doing small things well. A neighbor who checks in during a storm. A nurse who remembers your name. A friend who remembers how you take your coffee. These moments, simple as they are, carry the power to reteach us how to believe in people again. If you've been hurt, if trust feels broken or complicated in your world, please know, you're not alone. These experiences don't make you weak. They make you human. And there's strength in protecting your peace while still leaving space for the good to enter. Because at this stage, we don't need crowds. We just need real ones. People who honor our trust like a gift, not a given. And when we find them, or when they find us, it's worth holding on. Carefully, intentionally, and with the kind of quiet gratitude only time can teach. 4. The world feels different now. After decades of living, loving, and losing, you begin to notice that it's not just your relationships that change. It's the entire world around you. The streets are the same, the seasons still come and go, but somehow, everything feels different. Not always worse, not always better, just different. I often sit on my porch in the early evening and watch the neighborhood. Kids play less outside. Neighbors pass each other with polite nods instead of full conversations. The mailman no longer lingers for a chat. The pace of life has quickened, while the depth of connection has thinned. And for someone who remembers when community meant something more tangible, this shift feels strangely distant. There was a time when people looked each other in the eye, when you knew the names of everyone on your block, when family gatherings weren't scheduled months in advance, and when dropping by unannounced was seen as a kindness, not an inconvenience. I remember those days not with bitterness, but with a sense of longing for a kind of warmth that now feels rare. The truth is, the world has become louder, faster, and more distracted. Technology has given us tools I could never have imagined when I was young, and I'm grateful for many of them. I can video chat with my grandkids across the country, look up any recipe in seconds, or revisit old memories through photos stored online. But I also can't deny that something sacred has been lost along the way. I've seen it in the eyes of my peers, too. That quiet ache for the simplicity of real human presence. Now, people are more connected than ever, but they're scrolling more than they're listening. Conversations happen in comment sections instead of kitchens. Even within families, there are silences not because there's nothing to say, but because everyone is glued to their screens. As a specialist who has worked closely with older adults, I know this experience isn't unique to me. Many seniors report feeling invisible, not because they've become less valuable, but because the world has become less attentive. The elderly used to be sought out for wisdom. Now, they're often overlooked in favor of quick answers from a search bar. It's not all doom and gloom, of course. The world still holds beauty. There are still kind people, thoughtful gestures, unexpected moments of grace. But you do have to look harder for them now. You have to slow down in a world that rewards speed. You have to choose presence in a culture that rewards productivity. I've found that one of the greatest gifts of aging is perspective. While the world rushes by, I no longer feel the need to keep up. I've learned that peace doesn't live in the noise. It lives in the spaces in between, in the still mornings, in handwritten notes, in the way someone pauses before responding because they're actually listening. And so, I've started retreating, not out of fear or bitterness, but to preserve what still feels sacred to me. I don't need to attend every gathering. I don't have to respond to every message immediately. I choose a slower rhythm now, one that honors the values I still hold dear: honesty, kindness, depth, and sincerity. If you feel this shift too, you're not imagining it. The world truly is different. But that doesn't mean we've lost our place in it. It just means we have to become more deliberate about how we engage with it. We don't need to keep up. We need to hold on to what still matters. Because even in a world that moves too fast, there's still room for slowness, for stillness, for something real. 5. The difference between loneliness and solitude. There's a silence that used to scare me. A room with no conversation, a weekend without visitors, a phone that doesn't ring. In my younger days, that silence felt like punishment, a reminder that I was alone, that something was missing. But now, I see it differently. I've come to understand something I wish I had learned sooner. Loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. Loneliness is a hollow ache, a hunger for connection that feels out of reach. It whispers that you've been forgotten, that you no longer matter. Solitude, on the other hand, is a space you choose, a quiet sanctuary where the noise of the world softens and you can finally hear your own voice again. It didn't happen overnight. At first, pulling away from the social rhythm of life felt like I was drifting. But with time, I began to notice what replaced the noise: stillness, reflection, a sense of calm that I had never fully allowed myself before. And that's when I realized solitude is not emptiness, it's fullness. There's a kind of richness in sitting alone with your own thoughts and not feeling the urge to run from them. In my 70s, I find that some of the most meaningful moments of my day happen in silence. Sitting by the window, sipping tea, watching light shift across the floor. Taking a slow walk without a destination, just listening to the world as it is, without needing to add anything to it. In solitude, I don't feel the need to perform. I'm not trying to impress, explain, or earn space in someone else's life. I simply exist. And for the first time, that's enough. Over the years, I've had many clients and friends, especially older women, confess their fear of being alone. Not just physically, but emotionally. They fear being forgotten, left out, left behind. And I understand that fear deeply. But what I always share with them is this: solitude can become your ally, not your enemy. It can hold you, heal you, teach you. When you no longer fill your calendar with obligations, you start filling your soul with presence. You start listening to yourself, to nature, to the past without judgment. You discover that peace doesn't require a full house, just a full heart. I still enjoy seeing my loved ones. I light up when my grandchildren come running through the door. I love long conversations with old friends. But now, these moments feel different, not because they're fewer, but because they're chosen. They're not sandwiched between tasks. They're savored like a favorite song you don't want to rush through. That's what solitude gives you, the ability to choose with intention. To say yes because you want to, not because you feel obligated. And to say no without guilt, because peace has become your priority. Some days, the world still feels a bit too quiet. I'd be lying if I said I never missed the chaos of youth, the laughter, the crowded tables. But I've also learned to see beauty in the stillness, in the way wind rustles through trees, in the crackle of a fire, in the sound of my own breathing. So no, solitude is not loneliness. It's a gift that comes wrapped in years and seasoned with acceptance. It is the gentle space where healing happens, where reflection grows, where self-respect quietly returns. If you're afraid of being alone, let me gently tell you this. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. You're simply being invited into a new kind of relationship, the one you have with yourself. And trust me, that relationship, when nurtured, can become the most beautiful one of all. 6. Why I avoid certain people. There's a moment, somewhere between 65 and 70, when your heart shifts. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but in a quiet, sobering one. You begin to notice the things that drain you more quickly. Loud rooms, constant small talk, people who take more than they give. And one day, you realize you've started to avoid certain people. Not out of spite, but out of survival. In my earlier years, I used to believe that being kind meant being endlessly available. I showed up for everyone. I returned every call, went at every gathering, made room for people who didn't always make room for me. I thought that was love. I thought that was loyalty. But time has a way of teaching you that boundaries aren't barriers, they're bridges to peace. And as I've aged, I've learned that not everyone deserves access to your energy, your story, or your heart. I avoid people who gossip, because at this stage in life, I'd rather talk about ideas, dreams, and healing than rumors or other people's flaws. I avoid people who only reach out when they need something. Relationships should be reciprocal, not transactional. I no longer carry conversations alone. I avoid those who drain a room with their complaints but never seek solutions. I've lived too long and worked too hard on my inner peace to let chronic negativity undo it in minutes. And most importantly, I avoid anyone who makes me feel small, unseen, or unworthy. Because now, I finally understand. The way someone treats your time and your spirit says everything about how they see you. It took me decades to learn this. I used to stay in relationships far past their expiration date, trying to fix what was never mine to repair. I thought that loyalty meant endurance, even if it hurt. But with age comes clarity and the courage to say, this isn't good for me anymore. Many of my clients, especially those in their 60s and 70s, tell me how hard it is to step away from old friendships, from toxic family dynamics, from long-standing obligations. But we've known each other for so long, they say. Or, they're family. I can't just walk away. To which I gently say, you can. And sometimes, you must. Because choosing peace doesn't mean you're cruel. It means you've decided to live deliberately. It means your well-being finally matters as much as everyone else's. Avoiding certain people has allowed me to show up more fully for the ones who truly matter. The people who listen without judgment, who celebrate your joy without envy, who sit with you in silence and somehow make it feel like home. Now, when I spend time with someone, it's because I want to, not because I feel obligated. That shift alone has changed my entire experience of connection. Every conversation becomes more intentional. Every hug feels deeper. Every shared laugh feels earned. I don't keep score. I don't need anyone to be perfect, but I do need my peace to be protected. So, yes, I avoid people now, but not from anger, from clarity, from grace, from years of finally learning that you don't owe your presence to everyone who wants it. You owe it to yourself to protect your spirit. If this resonates with you, you're not selfish. You're healing. You're growing. You're finally honoring the quiet truth inside you that says, I deserve better than this. And that's not rejection. That's self-respect. 7. Does this sound familiar? Sometimes I sit quietly and wonder, am I the only one who feels this way? Is it just me who has become more selective with people? Who craves solitude over noise and meaning over momentum? Or is there an entire generation quietly feeling the same, but rarely saying it out loud? If you're in your 60s, 70s, or beyond, maybe you've noticed this shift too. You're not quite the same person you used to be. Not in a sad way, just in an honest way. The things that once thrilled you now feel exhausting. The people you once chased now feel distant. And the version of you that always said yes has learned to say no. You might find yourself turning down invitations that don't feel nourishing. You might crave stillness more than stimulation. And maybe, just maybe, you've stopped apologizing for wanting space to simply breathe. If that's you, I want you to know something important. You're not alone. Over the years, working with many seniors, I've heard the same story told in different voices. I don't enjoy big gatherings anymore. I used to be so social, but now I just want peace. I don't think I've changed. I think I'm finally becoming myself. It's not selfishness. It's self-awareness. Our later years offer a kind of clarity that youth simply cannot. We begin to realize what matters, and just as importantly, what no longer does. And as our time becomes more valuable, so does our energy. We no longer give it away freely. We give it where it's earned. But here's the quiet truth I want to say out loud. This shift can feel isolating at first, especially when the world tells us we should still be active, engaged, surrounded. It's easy to wonder if you're withdrawing or simply waking up. That's why this part of life requires community, not of numbers, but of truth. A space where we can say, I need more quiet. I miss the simplicity of old friendships. I no longer want to pretend I enjoy things I don't. And hear someone respond, me too. So, let me ask you, does this sound familiar? Have you found yourself drifting away from people who once felt central to your life? Have your social circles grown smaller, but deeper? Do you crave fewer conversations, but richer ones? If yes, I'd love for you to share it. Drop a comment below. Let's talk about this. Let's be real with each other. You'd be amazed how healing it is to hear "same here" from someone who understands. Because even though we might choose solitude, we weren't meant to feel alone in our experiences. There's a quiet comfort in knowing someone else gets it, that someone else is walking the same path, just a few steps ahead or behind. And if this doesn't sound familiar to you, if you still thrive in large gatherings and endless social circles, that's beautiful too. We all age differently. There's no one right way. The real gift is discovering what feels right for you and honoring it. For me, it meant stepping back from the noise. For someone else, it might mean stepping further into it. What matters is we make the choice consciously, not out of pressure, but out of presence. So no, it's not just you. It's many of us, quietly redefining what connection means. Learning that peace is a form of companionship, and realizing that the most honest friendships begin when we stop pretending we're fine and start saying how we really feel. 8. Embracing this chapter. At this point in life, I've stopped seeing aging as an ending. Instead, I see it as a quieter kind of beginning, one that asks for less noise and more presence. This chapter, right here and now, is not about slowing down. It's about arriving. In our youth, we chase milestones, careers, families, achievements, recognition. We're always moving, always reaching. But somewhere in your 60s or 70s, you realize something profound. You've already arrived at the place you once rushed toward. And now, you finally have time to look around. This chapter invites you to breathe, to stop chasing things that never truly mattered, to release the pressure of becoming something, and to begin honoring who you already are. There's a soft beauty in this stage of life that doesn't get talked about enough. The mornings are quieter, but deeper. The friendships are fewer, but truer. The ambitions are lighter, but more meaningful. There's a freedom in knowing you no longer have to prove anything to anyone. I've spoken to so many older adults who, once they let go of old expectations, found more joy than they ever felt in their younger years. It's not because life got easier, but because their hearts got clearer. We stop performing. We start living. Fully. Authentically. On our own terms. For me, embracing this chapter meant giving myself permission to live slower, but more sincerely. I no longer fill every hour. I protect them. I no longer say yes out of guilt. I say yes out of joy. I've learned that a peaceful life is not an empty life. It's a full one, filled with what truly matters. This is also a time for reflection, not to dwell in regret, but to give thanks. I look back at the younger version of myself and feel nothing but compassion. She tried her best with what she knew. She held on too long, gave too much, worried too often. But she also built the life I live now. And for that, I'm grateful. There were triumphs that lifted me, losses that shaped me, mistakes that taught me. All of it belongs here. All of it matters. But this chapter isn't just about looking back. It's about leaning forward, gently but bravely. Because there's still time. Time to start a new hobby. Time to say something you've been meaning to say. Time to nurture yourself. Time to forgive someone or yourself. One of the greatest myths about aging is that it's a slow fade. I disagree. I think it's a quiet bloom. Not a firework, but a candle, steady, warm, unwavering. And the light it casts is softer, but it reaches deeper. So if you find yourself in this chapter, wondering what's next, unsure how to feel, let me tell you this. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to be willing to live this season fully, gently, and truthfully. Let go of what no longer fits. Let go of roles that no longer feel right. Let go of noise that covers your truth. And instead, Fill this time with what feels like you. A walk in the morning sun. A book that moves your spirit. A friendship that makes you feel seen. A purpose that doesn't need applause, just presence. Because this chapter, right here, is not the epilogue. It's a powerful new page. And it's yours to write. At 70, life no longer feels like a race to win, but a story to live, slowly, deeply, and with heart. And if there's one thing I've learned through every twist and turn, it's this. You don't need to be surrounded to feel fulfilled. You only need to be aligned with yourself, your peace, and your truth. If this video touched something in you, if even just one sentence made you pause and nod quietly to yourself, I hope you'll carry that feeling with you. Because that's what this chapter is about. Holding on to the small moments that feel real and letting go of everything that doesn't. I didn't create this video to teach or to preach. I created it to connect, to say, I see you. And maybe you see me too. Speech balloon. So before we part today, I'd love to hear from you. Backhand index pointing right. What's one thing you've learned about yourself in this stage of life? Or maybe you just want to say me too. Either way, your words matter. Please share them in the comments. I read every one. And if you'd like to walk this journey together, week by week, story by story. Orange heart, give this video a thumbs up. Pushpin, click subscribe to join our growing community. Bell, turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos that might speak directly to your heart. Because even though we choose solitude, we don't have to feel alone. Here, we build quiet connection, one story at a time. Wherever you are in your journey, early, middle, or late, please remember this. You are allowed to choose peace. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to live quietly, fully, and entirely on your own terms. Thank you for sharing this time with me. Until next time, take good care of your heart and keep walking one gentle, honest step at a time.